application of MCDA to environmental remediation. That's the first one. Then we have a break, and then we have a more dedicated application of the Socrates tool. And then you have the afternoon to work in the exercise. I understand that some of you might have doubts, might have questions. We will be around to support you, so do not hesitate to call us. But more important is that there are a lot of resources at your disposal in Microsoft Teams. I guess that a lot of valuable literature is there. You can search and find what you need, and also in the internet you find a lot of, and that's part of the exercise, to look for information. Another point that I want to tell is that you will be presenting tomorrow in the morning, so we will have plenty of time to get the presentations. We have 5 groups, and we have something like 3 hours that brings us to 270 minutes. So 5 groups. We have pretty much half an hour for each group, so that we will, only 50 minutes, and then we can have general discussions. It would be good. It's not necessary, but if it would be good if you could put your presentations, your findings, in a PowerPoint presentation, so that we don't lose the efforts that you put in place, and also we can upload that information in Microsoft Teams later on, so we can have it for the future. Okay? Any doubt? Any comment? Anything that you might? So we are here this morning, afternoon. We go to where you were yesterday, and on Friday we go back to the big auditorium where you're going to have the opportunity to make your presentations, and then when it's finished, we're going to handle the certificates for those who participate in all activities, including the dinner yesterday. Those who did not go to the dinner yesterday will not have the certificate. Okay?
Said it was voluntary.
Voluntary, but with consequences. Good morning, everyone. So up till now, you had a lot of theory from different fields. So today it will be more about the practical side of it, applications. I will start with a presentation showing you how multi-criteria analysis is currently used for environmental remediation. And then we go to Giuseppe, who will illustrate one of the tools that can support this kind of assessments. So because I haven't maybe properly introduced myself before, I have just one slide, 1 minute, just to show you where I'm coming from. So I'm coming from Belgium, and our institute is located there in the upper corner. In Belgium, we have active and decommissioned nuclear installations, and we also have legacy sites from the phosphate industry and from the radium industries. Our institute is a foundation of public utility, and we have several competencies in site remediation. One is the radiological and non-radiological characterization of sites. We have models for transfer to the terrestrial and to the riverways and lakes. We have a group on social and ethical aspects, which is my group, and we also work on decision support for various aspects of site remediation. Okay, just that you know. So now I start with the presentation itself. So why do we need this kind of tools? You have already seen, I think, how environmental remediation has evolved. In the beginning, we were mostly interested in risk reduction and to do it in a timely and cost-effective way. At some point in time, the green remediation concept was introduced, which actually outlined main elements that have to be taken into account when doing environmental impact assessments, like energy, materials, air and atmosphere, water, and more recently land stewardship. But now we are in this paradigm where we try to stimulate sustainable remediation. So things become more complex, how to put together society, environment, economy. We know like the philosophy of it, but in practice, what do we do? And we also see that there is increasing stakeholder involvement. If in the beginning it was required to inform stakeholders, later on to consult with them, now there is this idea of having them involved in the process. Okay, so we have this complexity and it's not easy to handle it. So decision aid tools would be useful in order to help the decision makers and stakeholders describe what are the ways of proceeding in an environmental remediation project and also what the impact is of the different actions. We may be in the situation, which is very often that there are limited resources available and we need to think how to properly allocate them. And we need to have an inclusive process that is transparent, so it's clear what has been or not taken into account in decisions. It has to be traceable, and that's not always the case. So really to understand how certain decisions were taken, we need to think also about sustainability. So in order to address this challenge, the Maestri project that Horst already introduced has started a couple of years ago. And the idea of this project, which has the name which, as Horst mentioned, has also a link to Giuseppe. The point of this project is to build a social multi-criteria evaluation framework for environmental remediation, which also enables sustainability assessment. So, in other words, the project aims to integrate the different dimensions and activities relevant to environmental remediation with a view towards sustainable solutions. And also, we want to make it actionable, so to show how does it work in practice through case studies. There are three main activities in this project. One is to understand how this social multi-criteria evaluation may be helpful for environmental remediation, and Giuseppe is the chair of that activity. The other activity is to understand what are all the dimensions of sustainable remediation and how can we assess them. And here we relied on experts in sustainability, like Vivian Abershausen from the Free University of Brussels, and Deborah Otten, who in the radiological field is quite known for ethical assessments of environmental remediation. And then the third activity, which is very important, is to try to engage with people who are actually facing problems and to see how can we support them with practical case studies, offering tools or other sorts of support. Multi-criteria analysis is not new in itself, but what was missing so far was the inclusion of the social dimension. And in addition, there exists a number of tools, but they are not free. So in this project, we also wanted to work with people who were willing to make their tools available for the larger community. What we have done so far is a state-of-the-art review in a baseline report, which should hopefully appear in the course of this year. We organized several courses, webinars, which are all recorded and can be found on the internet. We are working with Giuseppe from GRC ISPRA for introducing tools that can be used by the larger community, but we also work with the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology. They are developing also multi-criteria decision analysis tool, which can be downloaded and used free of charge, at least for research and policy formulation purposes. And we are now in the stage where we are really looking at the practical applications. And we are working, for instance, with Giuseppe together with colleagues from Los Alamos for a cleanup project that they are doing now. On the one hand, to understand whether this framework is useful, and on the other hand, to provide support for the decision-making process. So now I would like to start by following the steps that Giuseppe already introduced. The steps that are help to structure the social multi-criteria evaluation framework, and just to show in practice how are people dealing with this. So the first step is to identify and engage with the relevant social actors. How do you do this? Well, you do a stakeholder analysis. You have seen what kind of questions could be asked and how can stakeholders be met. And it's also good at this point to set up the roles and rules for engagement. So what people can contribute with, at which moment they will be involved, in order also for them to understand how can they meaningfully contribute. This is an example from a case study that was done in Canada. This was not radiological contamination, but a chemical contamination. And the purpose was to produce a sustainable strategy for the management of contamination in soil, sediments, groundwater, and surface water. What they did was that they defined two sort of basic remedial options, which was, I think you know these options very well, soil and sediment excavation with offsite disposal on the one hand, or soil and sediment capping and containment. So based on these two main options, they defined different variants how the project could be dealt with. They have used a tool which is not publicly available, GoldSet CN. But what I wanted to point out in terms of stakeholders is that they had a very diverse group. They involved also First Nations, which was very important in their territory. And people were involved in defining the indicators, in defining the scores of different alternatives, but also in defining the weights, so the importance of each indicator. They used indicators which are inspired from the SURF UK framework that you have already seen. So you will recognize indicators such as, for instance, ecological integrity, water quality, air quality. This is just part of the assessment. They had still, they have considered more indicators than that. And what was interesting is that actually stakeholders appreciated that it was a transparent process and that they could see immediately what was the impact of providing additional pieces of information on how the options were scored and ranked. It contributed to trust building, and perhaps not surprisingly, they obtained very fast the permit for a pilot remediation project from the First Nations. As we are now discussing what would be the involvement of stakeholders in a multi-criteria decision analysis, what I want to point out is that if we use such a tool, this is not a replacement for stakeholder involvement. Sometimes there is this idea, okay, we put some social criteria, we can deal with it without involving stakeholders at all. This is not the purpose. So the purpose is to help stakeholders be involved by using such a tool. And it's also not a replacement for the decision maker. So at the end of the day, a human person will need to take a decision, but this tool can help them clarify why they want to go for one option or another. In the second step, as Giuseppe mentioned, we need to start to understand, okay, what people care about, what are their values, concerns, preferences, what would they like to see being taken into consideration in the decision process. Various methods can be used, and collaboration with social sciences is really needed, because if you want to organize focus groups or surveys or interviews, you really need people who can do it in a methodologically correct way. And you also have to clarify the goal of this assessment. Do you want just to describe the options? Because sometimes people are reluctant to do the overall aggregation. They just want to have a very clear description of what can be done and what the consequences are. Or you may wish to rank alternatives from like best to worst. Or you may just wish to choose one which is best according to the criteria and preferences you indicated, or you may wish to classify them. And we were discussing yesterday with a colleague from Egypt that you may just wish to classify them as potentially good options or options that can be ruled out. How do you do this? It looks complicated. Well, this is, for instance, these are the questions that were asked in the Los Alamos project. They had meetings with stakeholders, and they asked them, what are you more concerned about when you think about the community and the remediation project, and why? And what are the values that should guide the remediation process? Why are these important? Based on this, they have identified a number of bullet points, and then they try to group them in criteria. Of course, the options that are taken into consideration depend both on the problem, but also the actors. For instance, maybe from a technical point of view, the experts would like to analyze further a number of options, but maybe stakeholders would like to understand also, for instance, what would be the impact of digging out everything and moving it elsewhere. What is also interesting is that at the end of this analysis, maybe you will find an option which is very good in all, let's say, all criteria, but it's lacking seriously in some others. So you may want to think, how could this option be reconsidered maybe and improve its performance? And in one project, for instance, they were considering a remedial option involving the transport of waste dump from a mining site to a further location. But people were very reluctant to it. And why? Because in the past they had experiences with such options and there was a lot of dust generated and they really did not want this to happen. So what was proposed? Well, first to cover the trucks properly so that they would ensure there was no dust dispersion. But also what people wanted was that the transport would not be done at the time when children were going or returning from school. So with these adjustments, actually the social acceptability increased. It doesn't, from the project implementer's point of view, it was not great because there were 4 hours in which they couldn't do anything. But at the end of the day, it was a compromise to do it in a, well, technically, but also socially acceptable way. The next step would be to start to sort of synthesize what are the dimensions, objectives, and criteria to be taken into account. And there are different ways to proceed. One way to proceed would be to start from a number of dimensions or a set of indicators, like for instance you have done with the SURF UK. You had a list of 15 indicators, and let's say if you had a particular case, you would start to look at these indicators and pick up which ones are the most relevant. So for instance, in a review on how MCDA is applied currently for remediation, it was found that okay, the economic, the human health risk, the social, the technical, and the environmental dimensions are what appears in most of these studies. Or as I said, you can start with a SURF list of indicators. You can do it like this, but then you have to be aware that you are also losing a bit, you are focusing only on what has already been determined and you might miss some aspects. Another possibility is to ask questions like the ones I showed before. You ask people, okay, what do you care about? What kind of aspects should we take into consideration? So you get up, you end up with a sort of a messy picture with things like, for instance, future land use, emissions to air of CO2 or other gases, and you have to make sense of it. So in the beginning it looks pretty complicated, but maybe then you start to see, okay, but actually, well, some of these aspects relate to the social part, and some are related to environment, for instance, the green ones. And some are related to cost. Okay, some are health related, like radiation exposure to public or workers, and some are technology related. So you can then, afterwards try to make sense of it. You put all the social together, the environmental together, etc. So right now there is a sort of clearer structure. And you can also go upwards, like for instance, okay, so CO2 emissions and emissions of other gases belong to category air. Or, radiation exposure, again, is a sort of broader category. And then, for instance, future land use and burden on future generations could be considered to be like an ethical perspective. And you continue, and of course, the next step would be to find out indicators. So how actually are we going to find out how to assess burden on future generations? And you can use a combined approach, because in practice you have some regulation perhaps that already prescribes which elements you should include in an environmental impact assessment. For instance, economic cost and benefits, human health risk to workers and public, or for social, let's say, you have to consider things like noise, But then you can also have a consultation with stakeholders and find out what you have missed. And then with the types of questions that I showed before, you can find out, but people care also about burden on future generations and protection of cultural resources and maybe use of local workers. This may be an important buy-in for the community, that actually it is their people that are doing the work. And then you can say, so actually we have to also add this to the social perspective that we started from. When you establish this set of criteria, you have to think about a number of aspects. You should try to be as exhaustive as possible, so try to include all the aspects that are considered important by stakeholders. You should try not to repeat. For instance, imagine that you want to know health impact at the level of a population. You could perhaps evaluate it as a collective dose if you want to use collective dose, or maybe you could assess it as a risk. But at the end, these two are related, so you are double counting actually the same aspect. They have to be clear, operational, so you have to be able to assess them in some way. And they can be quantitative, like for instance, health risks or cost, or qualitative, like community values, for instance. And you should also take into account what stakeholders can offer in terms of knowledge. They know, for instance, a lot about their environment that maybe as an expert located 200 kilometers away, you don't really know. These are examples of criteria that are used in practical applications. For instance, for the economic, there's a lot of focus on direct cost and benefit, but still we see that gradually people are considering also more the indirect cost of the alternatives and also indirect benefits. For instance, increased value of property because environment has been restored to a better state. Or indirect costs, like for instance, decreased provision of ecosystem services. These are some other examples of social criteria that are being used, like for instance, local impact on communities, cultural heritage, equity. Very often we see a criterion called local acceptance. But this is something that is not, it's a black box. It's tempting to use it, but it's much better to understand why people are opposed or are in favor of a certain option. Maybe they care about the cultural resources. Maybe they care about the fact that it's an external company who will do it, and they would like to use their own, community members, because in this way they gain skills and knowledge. So it's better to really open up the box and understand this. But in the social multi-criteria evaluation framework that Giuseppe has presented, there is a place for this kind of information, but not in the impact matrix, but instead in the equity matrix, where you could, and he will show, you can consider the opinions, the subjective opinions overall of all stakeholders. To evaluate the options in the social multi-criteria framework, you have two types of assessments. One is the impact matrix. It is pretty clear what it means. It shows what is included in the analysis, but also it shows what is not included in the analysis. And then there is the equity matrix, where you have the subjective opinions of different stakeholder groups. And the analysis, for instance, that Socrates is providing shows the distance in opinions between different stakeholders groups. It shows who is like the winner and who is the loser in this analysis. Impact metrics can be qualitative. Paul didn't show it, but actually Surf UK has an Excel tool that helps you make a qualitative assessment. And you could, for instance, compare with no action, or because not taking a decision is also a decision. So you can say, okay, an option is much worse than not taking any option, or much better. So you can use a Likert scale that some people know about it, and you can even color it and get a very visual representation of how it could look like. However, if you do this, you have to really describe why you put a certain score and what does it mean, for instance, much worse, or much better. But you can also have mixed matrices, and this, for instance, is part of a matrix that was used for the assessment of the remediation of an Ukrainian trench site by Dimitri Bugai et al. And this is available also on ResearchGate. And they use different sorts of criteria, and some are quantitative, like for instance, maximum doses in the short or in the long term. And they also used qualitative criteria, like for instance, technical feasibility is something which is not so precise, but they said, okay, some options are technically feasible, and for others there might be issues with measuring and sorting certain materials. And the good part about multi-criteria analysis is that it helps you work with this kind of impact matrices. Then you need to sort of aggregate. How do we aggregate? And Giuseppe clearly mentioned that these kind of tools help you aggregate pears and oranges. No, apples and oranges. Or that you can get a nice, interesting fruit salad, let's say. So most of the time you need to say something about what is more important in your assessment. And usually you do it by assigning a weight to each criterion. You say, okay, health should count for 50% and maybe social for 25% and environment for 25%. And we forgot about the economics, but that's very important, so it should also have a weight. And already at this point, the analysis begins. So, because up to now, you can even use an Excel sheet. Okay, you don't need any tool up to this point where you are describing the options. But from this point forward, it's helpful to have a tool. And for instance, Socrates that Giuseppe will demonstrate, or the multi-criteria decision analysis tool from KIT, Karlsruhe Institute of Technology, could be used. An attention point is that weights do not really mean the same thing when you are using different methods. Some methods, as Giuseppe mentioned, are non-compensatory, like for instance Socrates, and then the weights have the meaning of importance coefficients. And this is how people think in general, you know. For instance, in Belgium, they use a multi-criteria analysis tool, and they say, okay, for us, economic, social, and environmental should have equal weights, because this is what is an ethical point of view. Okay, so this is like sort of general importance of criteria. But if you use a weight sum aggregation, so you multiply the score on each criterion with the weight of the criterion and make the sum, then the weights mean something else. They mean trade-offs, because what you are doing is actually saying, how much is worse in terms of cost? For instance, the improvement of environmental quality from this particular level to another one. These are sort of reasonings that you need to do, and it's a bit more complicated. But this kind of analysis is simplified if we try to transform criteria, for instance, in a common scale, like for instance, 1 is bad and 100 is very good, and you can try to make this reasoning, and then working with weights is a little bit easier, but still it's about trade-offs. Of course, all these parameters, the impact of different alternatives may be uncertain. You don't know exactly how much something will cost, or you know, there are different sources of uncertainty. Or maybe the criteria, you might exclude or add one criterion, or the weights. This is one of the most important objectives that people are putting forward when applying such methods. Oh, but, and also Giuseppe mentioned, you use these weights, but can you manipulate the result? What if I put another weight? Do I get something else? So it's important to do this kind of analysis to see, okay, is your ranking stable? Because maybe what you think is your preferred option, actually, there is no setting of the model in which you could get this option as the best one, you know? So there is something, let's say in this case, your intuition does not correspond to what the evidence is showing. And this kind of analysis is very important because, for instance, this is an example from Linkov and colleagues on environmental remediation. And they used the same options, but they had two types of expert groups. First expert group was the United States Army Corps of Engineering, and they used their own weighting. And the others were members of the Environmental Protection Agency. And you see how different these assessments are. So different stakeholders will have potentially different views on the weights. So it's important, it's really important to do sensitivity analysis to understand the changes in the model when you have changes in parameters, and also robustness. So what kind of conclusions can you say? These are valid, however you change the weights. A comprehensive example can be found in this publication that I mentioned, but Giuseppe will also provide several other examples. In terms of how does this framework support sustainability assessment? You have seen, for instance, SURF UK, it's clear. You use sustainability indicators and you try to provide for a balanced solution. But there are also other tools being developed with a view towards sustainability. For instance, one is SCORE. It also uses some sort of multi-criteria aggregation. It looks at the whole process of remediation, and as you can see, there are quite some similarities with what you have already seen so far. So how can this kind of analysis be used? Well, you can use it as a standalone analysis, meaning that you just do the social multi-criteria evaluation, as you have seen so far. But you can also use it in combination with other tools that people are using. For instance, lifecycle assessment, to have a very clear description of the environmental impact, or maybe a cost-effective, a certain type of economic analysis. And you can use it in combination with participatory methods, for instance, to gather stakeholder feedback, like nominal group techniques, surveys, mind mapping, for instance, to try to group all the criteria, to try to group all the important aspects in criteria. And you can use it in combination with data visualization, for instance, GIS tool. Imagine that you want to prioritize the sites that should be remediated. You could have a graphical representation with a GIS to show which sites seem to be most important. This is an example of a case study reported in the literature. It dealt with the remediation at a uranium mining site. The problem there was the unconfined uranium tailings and the fact that there was an excess of gamma radiation on top of acceptable levels. And the study was to evaluate different options for an engineered vegetative cover on top of the tailing deposits. They used the multi-criteria analysis to capture stakeholders' opinion, but they also used life cycle assessment to get an expert opinion about these options. The stakeholders in this case were selected from the employees, but representing 5 interest groups, so they would have benefited for a wider stakeholder involvement. But it was just for internal purposes only, as an exercise. So what they did in terms of finding stakeholders' opinion, they asked them to rank the best option with like 100 points, and then to score the best option with 100 points, and then to score the others in comparison with the best option. They used some weights, and they did an additive sum aggregation an additive aggregation in order to find what is the overall stakeholder opinion. It can also be used in combination with economic analysis. For instance, in an application of the SCORE tool, they consider the environmental, the social, and the economic dimension. And the economic dimension was measured as the net present value in a cost-benefit analysis. But the environmental and the social dimensions were not transformed to monetary to a monetary evaluation. So what are some key points of this all? Well, it can provide a useful framework for environmental remediation and potentially also decommissioning. It is currently being used. Like in Belgium, they use a multi-criteria analysis tool. This is used by soil experts in order to decide what is the best course of action for soil remediation. It's also used in the Netherlands. They use a methodology called REC, Risk, Environment and Cost. What we see from the current applications is that the social is not so well represented. So with the social multi-criteria evaluation framework that we propose, we show how you can also include this dimension. Sustainability can be included in different ways, but certainly through sustainability indicators. It must be participatory, because otherwise it will fail. If you come to your stakeholders with this kind of table and this kind of results, and they have no idea why you took specific criteria into consideration and why not, there will be reluctance to accept the results, or they may be reluctant. Sensitivity and robustness analysis are needed, because you need to show what is the impact of, for instance, changing weights, and also well, as I said, if you are looking for a sustainability assessment, you should have some consideration of social aspects and indirect costs as well. And I like to end with this quote from a study that was done already more than 20 years ago. And they tried to see how stakeholders react when they have to work solely based on techno-scientific facts or including also social considerations. And they found that if you include broader considerations, this is also more helpful for people to make decisions considering what really matters to them. So I hope it was clear, but if you have any questions, I'm very happy to answer. And Giuseppe will then follow with showing a very interesting tool.
Estaba pensando en qué etapa del proyecto ejecutivo, o sea, nosotros tomamos la decisión de remediar un sitio.
In which stage of executive decision of the project you make the decision to remediate the site?
I'm not sure if I understand correctly,
O sea,
but for
tomamos
instance,
la decisión de realizar un proyecto de remediación. Hacemos todos los pasos. Lo social lo empezamos a trabajar al principio porque empezamos a identificar cuáles son los actores, pero en lo técnico recién aparece cuando yo evalúo alternativas. ¿Entendés lo que yo quiero?
I understand. So you make a decision to remediate the site, you identify the social actors, you have all this clear, but the technical team needs to make decisions about what to be done. So the question is, how does it happen?
well, ideally you would have a process that considers all these aspects together. You know, you can, yes. I mean, maybe you have first the experts perhaps making a sort of a preliminary reflection on what could, from a technical point of view, be possible remediation options. And then you can discuss with the stakeholders if maybe there are any options that you didn't consider and they would like to see, even if you have doubts about them, but they would like to include them in the analysis, so you could include them. And of course, no remediation is also an option that I think in many countries is also like a standard that you have to consider it. You have to compare with like status quo, like no option.
If you remember yesterday, Mihail talked about one of the documents of the agency, definition of site end states. So in a remediation project, before thinking about any technical option, what you need to do is to define the site end state. What is the site end state? Are the conditions of the site that they will be left after the remediation work is done, right? But the site end state on its turn is connected with the future use of the site. So you need to agree with the community and other actors in which way that site could be left after the remediation work is done. That's clear? So you need to say, well, we want to have this recreational park. We want to have this industrial facility. We want to have here a kindergarten or a university, or depending on the site. I'm just speculating. So for each one of these future use, definitely there will be certain conditions. For example, if you want to have unrestricted use, you can use the site for every purpose. So the levels of contamination would need to be, let's say, eventually lower than if the site will be put for industrial use. But this is a matter of decision with the participation of those that are interested. Now, you ask about when the technical solution will come in, when those things have been defined. Because if you want to say, guarantee that some solutions will deliver the kind of exposure that we consider together to be appropriate, then you need to see, how do I do this? Do I do this by digging the soil that is contaminated and moving somewhere else? And then all these things that Katrinel mentioned will need to be considered, because there will be CO2 emission, there will be nuisance for the, people will be upset with the flow of trucks coming in and out. There will be cost with transportation. Who will pay for the cost? You are an engineer, a project manager, you will understand this. Eventually there is a need to have roads, open roads, because the access for the mine may be not adequate for the kind of transportation you need to do with this material. Okay, now connecting with your exercise, you may decide, okay, let's leave the material there in the site. So this option should have been agreed. Well, we need to agree with this. Well, the material will be, but what kind of guarantees we can provide that the material in the site will not contaminate the groundwater? So you need to make eventually have some engineering work to contain the material and avoid contamination. Again, it will add cost, but in this case, the site can be only repurposed for one specific, for restricted uses. Let's say have a parking lot, have a industry operating there, right? So all of this need to consider the different components, elements that Katrinel, this is what we are trying to tell you. Of course, that there will need another course to go into the details of the technologies that are available, and we have done it already. We can talk about groundwater remediation, we can talk about all these engineer barriers. We have publications about engineer barriers. All this is provided. So important is to see the multidisciplinarity of this decision, what it involves, and how you can get to some final solutions using the tools that we are talking about. Did I make it clear? But important is you need to start the remediation project with the end in mind. You cannot do anything if you don't know where you want to go. And to define where you want to go, you can do like we saw yesterday. This is what will be done, and you tell the people that's the solution for you, or you can build this solution in a participatory process. Giuseppe?
Just want to add a small thing. It's again about linearity and circularity. It's not a linear step, you finalize one, then you go to the other, but it's continuous feedback loops. So at some stage you can discover that you forget that there was an important option that you didn't consider. So you can go back and say, okay, what happens if I introduce this new option? So it's a continuous learning process that at some stage you decide to stop. Okay, we have a clear full picture of the problem. We all agree that this is a good decision model to use, and we go on. But till you don't arrive at this final decision, it's a continuous interaction between social actors, technical people, policymakers, decision analysis. So don't take it as a linear, okay, we finished, then the second, then the third. It's not like that. There is continuous feedback loops between one step and the other.
I am an engineer for it.
Well, I just wanted to make a small comment because you said we always have to have the end in sight. In mind. In mind. Well, in sight. But then the question is, how do you agree with stakeholders what is the end without understanding what does it take to get there? Because if you don't have unlimited resources, maybe you say, okay, we start from the idea that the best thing is to bring everything to background, those level. But then you do this kind of assessment and you see, oh, actually it's extremely expensive, so maybe we need to consider perhaps other uses of the site and see whether we are able to do it or not, you know. Or you can start from the beginning saying, okay, some people think we should take everything out, some people say we should do it like, take maybe the most, highest contamination away and keep the rest on site. What are the options for the two types of possible end states, and then try to understand what consequences are, you know, most acceptable for all stakeholders. So even if you have set an end state as a goal, you have to also think about, okay, can we actually, is it meaningful to do it, or could we perhaps consider another possible end state, you know, and modify the options accordingly. Any other question?
Do you have some uncertainties for each aspect, for economics, human health risk, social, technical, environmental? You have some uncertainties
Yes.
for using, and if you have, how do you manage these uncertainties during the remediation?
During this analysis?
Yeah.
Well, you can include this uncertainty, for instance, by specifying an interval. Like, okay, we don't know what the cost is, but we think it could be between these boundaries, or maybe you have an idea about what is the likely cost, and you can use a distribution. And about the weights, you can consider, okay, we consider all values within a certain range, you know. For instance, between 0, if the weights are assessed between 0 and 1, you can say, okay, what happens if the weights are varying between 0 and 0.5, you know. And, well, you can do different types of calculations. You can sample from the model parameters and see what is the effect. Yeah, different methods use different tools for uncertainty analysis, but yes, it's possible to include it. And of course, uncertainty is always there, and it's a bit strange not to consider it. Okay. Well, if you think of any questions, please ask me also afterwards. So then maybe we go to Giuseppe.
Yeah, I was thinking that one important thing that Catherine highlighted today is the fact that you say you saw a lot of different applications, all of them real-world applications, and no one of them was okay, you get a result of the model, this is what you have to do. The main idea was, as she highlighted, multi-criteria decision aid. The meaning there is in mind that you are supporting a human making a decision, and that's very important. So don't consider that this is an automatic way of getting there by using a model, but all what is really important is really all the process you can create by using this approach and all the information you can get. I think this is a kind of something common to all the approaches that she presented. So, thank you very much, Katrina. It was really very interesting.
Thank you, Giuseppe. So I think now it's your turn.
Okay. Everybody's ready? Warm and ready. Great. So, what we will do this morning? As said yesterday, I will introduce just very, very basic mathematical concept, just to have a basic understanding of what the software is doing. And then I will show you how to use it and what you can do with it. Important point, as Catherine said, the software is open to the public, so I will show you how to get there, very easy. You can use with no problem. important point, you do not share your data when you use it, okay? I always get this, this question, okay, it's a web app, so what happens with my data? No problem, the data stay on your computer, okay? So you don't share, whatever you use is not shared with anybody else. Take care to save your data now and then to the hard drive, because of course they stay in the cache of your browser. So if you clean the cache, you lose everything. So it's very important you save the data at some stage now and then on the hard disk. So, as Catrinelle made clear also today with all the overview of the various case studies, the whole idea of decision aid, of multi-criteria decision aid, as was first formulated by Professor Bernard Roy, who was one of the father of the whole thing, is this idea to help a decision maker, okay? This idea was more a concrete decision maker, more, let's say, type of decision where it was kind of business technocrat, in the sense that somebody who is clear, the one who is going to take the decision, okay? We are in an environment that is a bit more fuzzy in the sense that we have a lot of stakeholders, policymakers, etc., etc. So it's the social multi-criteria means the framework is wider, but the idea is still that one, okay? We want to support decision, not making decision in place of somebody else. That's very important, okay? The whole thing is supporting, is learning. All the process is helping all the people involved in learning about it. The mathematics involved, the issue in reality is very old because it's the same of voting theory. If you think about voting, what we do, all of us, we are presented with a set of options and we vote, which is the most preferred option. If instead of people, of voters, we get criteria, the problem is exactly the same, okay? Formally, the problem of voting theory, multi-criteria decision analysis is exactly the same. So, the mathematical fields involved are the classical voting theory, or what in economics is called social choice, that basically was this idea of voting, what different individuals want, and how we arrive at social preference, what the whole society wish to achieve, okay? So the mathematics is exactly the same. And this is the two fields that converged into the multi-criteria decision analysis, let's say technical aspects. Of course, as I said, social means, okay, what the society wants, okay? So social multi-criteria is building on social choice in two ways, in two different ways. From the technical point of view, because we can use some of the idea of the algorithms that were developed in voting theory, and we can merge with multi-criteria decision analysis. The issue of aggregating individual preferences to get what we want as a society is very old. It comes from the Middle Ages, okay? And it was very present everywhere. For example, we are talking about something in the 13th century, okay? How to vote the Pope. Before this Pope, it was who was voicing more, okay? It was, I want that, I want people, then there's, okay, you are the Pope. Then it was clear saying, no, this is not how it should work. We need to have two numbers. And the only way to choose is by using number. So it was not still a democratic society, but some institutions were a kind of democracy. It is reported also more or less in that period that Blanquerna, by Ramon Llull, that he was traveling around at some stage in a monastery. There was the problem to vote who was the head of the monastery. And again, what is reported in the book is how we aggregate these preferences to get the winner. But in reality, it seems that Ramon Llull knew about that because of some Arabic mathematicians. So you see, the problem was there everywhere, in the Eastern and the Western society. So, as I said yesterday, which is the technical issue? If we start just from the mathematical point of view, the issue is how we aggregate all the different criteria to get the ranking of the various options we have. The voting theory is a bit simple. It's more simple, why? Because what you get is just an ordinal score. So you know I want this candidate first, this is my second best, my third, and so on, okay? A bit like Paul asked you to do. An order of the different options, according, instead of call criteria, we can call this voter, will be exactly the same. In the case of the multi-criteria decision analysis case, in the impact matrix, we may have much more complex information. We may have this ordinal on some criteria, we may have some quantitative, we may have some uncertainties, as it was asked before. One way of dealing with uncertainty is on the scores, okay? In a multi-criteria framework, you may have uncertainty in many steps. You may have uncertainties on the weights. You may have uncertainty on which criteria to use. You may have uncertainty on the scores. Okay, you know there's a quantitative score, but for example, typically, risk is a probability distribution, no? So you may have all the different information on the different criterion scores, on the different criterion impact. How we deal all this information in a consistent way. Remember, our objective is not the ideal point. What is best according to all criteria at the same time. Normally this doesn't exist. So the best of all the possible worlds normally doesn't exist. We look for a balanced solution, what is called technically a compromise solution. The semantic is very interesting, no? It was compromise solution in a mathematical sense, but if we are in the social multi-criteria framework, compromise might mean also a compromise between the different actors involved, so it becomes also a social compromise. That's the reason why in the social multi-criteria framework normally we have two definitions. One is the technical compromise solution, meaning what is coming out of the multi-criteria impact matrix. The other is the social compromise solution, that is, according to the opinion of the different stakeholders, what they would like to have. Okay? So we have two different things. The evidence-based technical solution, the more social opinion-based. The two things might be the same or might be different. Then it's an issue of according to your case study, to what the policymaker want to achieve, to balance these two pieces of information you have. As Catherine had just said before, in this aggregation, take care, we might have compensatory, non-compensatory algorithm. What I will show you now is a non-compensatory approach. That in our specific field, it's very important, okay? Because if you consider the environmental remediation or decommissioning has to be considered, assess, you want to assess different options. according to different dimensions. Complete compensability means, it's like a school. If you have a 3 mathematics, a 10 in history, is then, let's imagine a system where you have 0, 10, okay? Normally, to be promoted, you need to have at least a minimum in all the different topics. But you may also have a system where if you are very good in history, very bad in mathematics, or vice versa, you still are promoted, okay? So, a system where 10 in history compensated 3 in history is complete compensatory, okay? A system where you get at least having a minimum, 5, 6, 7, whatever, is partially compensatory or non-compensatory. Completely non-compensatory would mean the perfect of the possible world, 10 in each topic, okay? If you get 10 in history, 10 in mathematics, 10 in geography, etc., okay, otherwise no. This is probably too demanding. So we move in this world of non-compensation, but where you allow for small compensation, okay? Not full compensation, not 0, 10, but you know that the range you can move, the balance you look for, has to be at least a minimum acceptable everywhere. Otherwise, you don't go on. So we are moving exactly in this framework. As Catherine has said, take care. There is an important issue. That's very important in practice because there are a lot of mistakes. Which is the most common mistake? Which is the easiest way of dealing with this type of information? So-called weighted summation method. You make a kind of standardization of the different scores between 0 and 1, then you multiply for the weight you have on each of these criteria, and you get an overall score. And people say, okay, this is the best, the second, the third. It's very simple in theory, but it's in practice better, but it's very complex in reality, because when you use this type of complete compensation, if you have a summation, it's completely compensatory approach. This means that the weight is not important, okay? It's a very important point. In practical, people always use the weight means the higher the weight, the more important the criterion, the dimension is. But if you are in a compensatory fashion, that's more like this. Is when you buy a car, okay, I am not willing to pay a given, I don't know, 15,000 euro. So what I do, I want to pay less, but then I have to get something. If I want to have a better score on price, so I want to pay less, I get somewhere worse, okay? For example, how much I'm willing to have less on safety. No airbag, for example, okay? So all the issue is on the scores. While on the importance interpretation of the criteria, the issue is on the way, on the criteria, on the name of the criteria, okay? Is cost important or not? Is the environmental impact more important than the cost or not? So this discussion is there. While in the compensatory fashion, the discussion on the weights is on the score of the criteria. So this is very important, okay? You cannot talk about the criteria if you don't know the score. While in the case of non-compensatory approaches, all the discussion is a priori. Without knowing the score, you may decide if a criterion is more important, equally important, or less important than another one. So the consequences are very, very important. So my suggestion is, when you are in this type of issues, stay with non-compensatory mathematics. which was the issue that was very well known already in the Middle Ages. Look at that. We have 21 voters, okay? And we have 3 options, which is the winner option. So A gets 8 votes, B 7, and C 6. So the winner is 8. Do we agree? So the winner is A, is the one who is getting the majority, okay? This might be the candidate to be a pope, the president of whatever republic, this might represent voting for parties, okay? So we are asked normally, even today, that we have to say which is our favorite candidate, which is our favorite party, and that's it. So who gets the majority is the winner. But what we have in the matrix is something different. We have the all order. For each one of these criterion, you know which is the best option and the worst option, the second best, and so on. No? For each one of these criteria, you know that. So you have much more information. And by the way, according to social choice, you should always ask people, never which is your best option, but which is the ranking of all the options you are considering. That's very important also in terms of social multi-criteria evaluation. When we ask in operational terms, when we ask preferences of stakeholders, we should ask the preferences for what? For all the options we are considering, not just for what you like best, okay? This is an important operational issue when you interact with them. What do you want to know? You want to know which is their favorite option, or you want to know which is the ranking of all the possible options? The answer is the ranking, the way they evaluate all the possible options. Why? There is an important point here. If instead of asking which is your favorite option, you ask for the whole ranking, you get a different picture, because in this case the winner is not clear anymore, okay? That's the reason we need the kind of mathematical aggregation rule. Why the winner is not clear anymore? Because you see, if you know only the first place, okay, very clear, A is the winner. But now look, eight voters would say A, but 13 voters put A in the bottom position. You see? So the absolute majority, not the relative like when we ask in the first place, the absolute majority out of 21, 13 do not want A, is the worst possible word. So that's very important, okay? We always have to ask which is your ranking, what you want, but also what you do not absolutely want. And then we have to see from this, out of this ranking, how we choose our best option. This is the social choice problem, okay? In multi-criteria terms, it's exactly the same. If this instead of being voters are criteria, the problem is the same, okay? How we get which is our favorite option, or our favorite ranking out of all this information. Clear? So, for me, it's disappointing the fact that we know this from the Middle Ages. Arabic mathematicians were aware of this. Some, let's say, in some environments in the Western world was also known. It was again very well known, very close to the French Revolution, when the problem was how we vote for the president of the French Academy of Sciences. They were all scientists, so they knew. French mathematicians were very good in the 18th century, and so they said, oh, but this doesn't work. How we solve? So all this has been always there. Why it has not been clearly solved? There were some attempts, and for example, Condorcet and Borda, they were two French mathematicians who were dealing with this, had the solution. But as I said, which was the issue? This is combinatorial mathematics. Combinatorial mathematics doesn't work without computers. So we have to arrive at the end of the 20th century to have the possibility to implement this type of algorithms. So basically, yeah.
Just a question.
You have to wait 7 seconds, I learned.
5.
5, okay.
So back to your slide, the previous slide. I know this is a kind of an example, and we should not take it by the letter. But in many circumstances, even if we have bigger numbers, one way that I could look to the table is to say that 3, 8, 6, and 7 is the same thing, right? Is it 8, 7, and 6, option A, B, C? I would say that they are equally voted because the differences in the numbers are not quite relevant. I know it is a kind of an example to show to make the point, but I want to make that, for example, in such kind of decisions, it's not the case that you have a qualified majority, so that you can say that this is really a majority. This is why in Parliament sometimes some laws are not only passed if you have 2/3 of the voters. So is there something we could consider in this situation?
What you thought is exactly what Condorcet was thinking. His idea was we do all the pairwise comparison, and then we look which is the option that is more voted, and we choose which one. The one with the majority, where this majority might be more than 50%, but might be also more. And this is the basic idea implemented in the lecture methods by Bernard Waddell, where the first non-compensatory methods, where you can decide that, for example, the majority you want to accept is 60%, 65%, okay? You can play with this. I will show you, okay, I don't want to go more in depth on this, which is the issue with this, that you can get the so-called Condorcet paradox, that sometimes you get a circularity. A is better than B, B is better than C, C is better than A. So it's a cycle. So we have to find a way to break this cycle. And the algorithm I'm going to introduce you now is exactly done for this. Being non-compensatory, being Condorcet based, so with this idea that we have to choose what is in the majority. Otherwise, if the difference is not that big, we might have different winners, as you said. And the UN Security Council, how it works. There is a majority, but there is also the possibility of having veto. Okay? This is what exactly is implemented, for example, in the lecture methods. Even if one criteria, only one, is against the majority, but the opposition is very strong, so the intensity of the opposition is very strong, you block majority. This is exactly the non-compensatory idea. Even if only one criteria is against all the others, but this criterion is, for example, environmental impact, and you want that the environmental impact has to be at a minimum level, only this can block, okay? So the idea is a bit how sometimes is implemented in some, let's say, political issues. Then it's translated into some kind of more sophisticated algorithm. But the idea basically is exactly this. how you get something that the majority would like to have, using all the information you have, in our specific case, avoiding compensability and avoiding this cycle issue. Okay? So, what we have as information, basically, intensity of preference is a technical word to say, if I know the score in quantitative terms, then I always know not only that A is better than B according to that criterion, also I know how much A is better than B. Okay? If a car has 4 airbags and the other one has 10 airbags, you know that there is a clear difference. Okay? You have 6 airbags more in another car. Okay? The statics is much more difficult to quantify, so you will say that car A is better than car B in terms of statics. So in the airbag case, you have information on the intensity of preference. In the case of statics, you don't have. It's only an ordinal scale of measurement. This ordinal scale is the number, okay? So you may know the intensity, which criterion is better than another one, each pair of options. Then you also know, according to each pair of options, that a majority of criterion, a minority of criterion, you know how many voters that option gets, okay? So number is the number of votes. Number of criteria, the number of voters. The weight. So, it's not only how many criteria we say A is better than B, but depends also on the weight you have attached to that criterion, okay? So if you use, they say, 3 criteria out of 5 say that A is better than B, is one thing. But if these 3 criteria have 0, 2, 0, 2, 0, 2, is 60% of criteria say that A is better than B. But if it is 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, it's 30%, okay? So, it's very important that if we use criteria, these criteria are the ones that, if we use weights, these weights are counted and are correcting when we count for the number of criteria that in favor of given option. The point of the cycle we were talking about. The last piece of information we have to arrive at this ranking is the relation among all the possible options. What I mean is, I can play tennis with Catrinelle, okay? Maybe I win, we can play 2 times, I win both times, okay? So in theory, I play tennis better than Catrinelle. But then, if it's a championship and we play pairwise, so I play with Catrinelle, then with you, then with you, then with you, and so on, then might happen something like this. Catrinelle lost with me, but then won with all of you, while I lost with all of you. It may happen, okay? So, who is the winner? Although in the direct comparison I played better than Catrinelle, but then I lost with all of you and she won with all of you, so she is the winner, not me. Okay? It's not intuitive, but it's very important. This is the way like the Olympic Games work, for example. Okay, many sports work. The football, the Formula 1, okay? So it's very important that we consider all these issues. So it's not that easy, it's more counterintuitive than we think when we talk about these ranking issues. So, synthesizing. What we know about quantitative criteria, what we know about how many criteria are in favor of or against, What we know about the weight, okay, as you can see in this case I'm talking about weights as importance coefficient. So a priori we attach this weight to the criteria. What happens among all the possible alternatives we are considering, okay? This is important piece of information. As we were talking before, if I, at some stage during the process, I'm considering a new alternative, a new option, I cannot compare directly this option with what's the winner before. I have to rerun everything, okay? It's very important, this point. It's not intuitive, but it's very important, okay? If you decided to buy car A and then you discover that there is a car Z on the market that you were not considered, you have to rerun the whole process, not just comparing the new car with the car that you decided before to buy. That's the point. So, let's imagine we have a problem like this. And this is, I was talking about sustainability indicators, no? The environmental performance index, for example, etc., etc. How this type of indexes, how they work. You have information on single indicator that in case of multi-criteria we call criteria, okay? When we are at this, when we are considering a decision problem, so we use the term criteria. So, first criterion, well, let's say GDP, how wealthy is a given country. Very important, what we have to decide, is this criterion to be minimized or to be maximized? You cannot imagine in practice how many people make this very basic mistake. GDP is to be, in theory, maximized, okay? So, the higher, the better. Unemployment rate, remember I showed you the relation between GDP and unemployment rate. The unemployment rate in principle has to be minimized, okay? So in this case it's exactly the other way around. The lower the score, the better. Solid waste generation. Of course, the less waste we produce, is the basic message of circular economy. So this is to be minimized. Income, let's say income distribution. Okay, the more equal is our society, the better. So in this case also should be minimized. Crime rate, very clear, should be minimized. So what this type of approaches will produce? We have to compare pairwise the options, so A with B, A with C, B with C, okay? With only three options is easy. What we do? Between A and B, which is the best option? B, okay? So one criterion is in favor of B. What in favor with which percentage? With the weight we have attached to this, okay? So we consider the weight that say that for GDP, B is better than A. What is happening at unemployment rate? Well, again, B is better than A. What is happening with solid waste? In this case, is to be minimized, so A is better than B. Income dispersion has to be minimized, A is better than B. Crime rate has to be minimized, then A is better than B. So basically we have two criteria in favor of B, three criteria in favor of B. What we count, the weights, they are in favor of A, and the weights, they are in favor of B. So we get something like this, okay? What is important here is how we compare. We consider criterion by criterion, minimization, maximization. We consider the way we have attached, so we have an information. How much A is better than B, how much B is better than A, according to the information we have. If we do this pairwise comparison for all the criteria, we get all this type of information, okay? A, B, BA, A, C, CA, etc., etc. Do we need to do all the computations? In reality, only 50% is sufficient, okay? If we know that 30% of weights are in favor of A, we know that by definition 70% of weights will be in favor of B, okay? Because it's a constant sum matrix. So, we get this type of things. This is called the outranking matrix. This is the basics of Condorcet approach. So now, if we have the information for each pair with all the criteria we consider, we know exactly per row that A is better than B, okay? But if we compare A and C, then A is not that much better than C. It's the other way around. In fact, if we look at the row of C, C is better than A. Okay. So what we have in an outranking matrix, we have the aggregation of all criteria according to each pair or for each pair of option we are considering. Okay? This is exactly the basic of the Condorcet approach. Then, how we choose the winner? Condorcet was proposing, okay, let's decide which is the majority. The one that gets the majority threshold is the winner. But then it was discovered that this will create many problems. One of them is this one of the cycle. Other approaches will create other issues. This is the basic of non-compensatory approaches, okay? All non-compensatory approaches go pairwise comparison and get this type of information. How we can exploit them? Okay. We can do something like this. And this is the way to be non-compensatory and to solve the Condorcet paradox issue. And this is interesting because this both social choice and multi-criteria decision analysis in theory, okay, can say technical mathematical literature would say this is a very good way to solve the problem, okay? Because we choose not the most voted option that we already know this has problem, but the most voted ranking, okay? So what we do is, what we know in this matrix, that A is better than C for 66% of weights, A is better than C for the 53%, okay? So how we get which is the total support of ranking A, B, C? We have to look on A better than B, okay, we get this here. Then A better than C, then we get here. Then which is the other piece of information? B and C. So, which is the score of B against C is this one, okay? We make all this, we make the summation, and we know which is the total support of this ranking, okay? How people would like to get this ranking if it is our voters, or what criteria would say is the best ranking. If we do this for all the possible ranking we have, so we get all the permutations, we are in these situations, okay? We know exactly which is the total support for all the different rankings, which is the winning one, the one who gets the highest support, okay? So this is a very easy way, in a sense, to exploit all the information we have in a consistent way, okay? We don't lose any piece of information, we don't create any possible paradox, and what we are choosing is the best ranking, okay? So in this case, we know if this is an election of parties, the party C is better than A, is better than B, because this is the ranking, not the option, that people would like to have. If this is a multi-criteria matrix result, is what, according to the criteria we are using, and the weights we are using, and the relation, you see, the relation. Pairwise comparison is only what happened between Catrinelle and myself when we played tennis. The ranking is what happened with all of us, okay? So this is the complete piece of information. So in this way, we can get very consistent solutions. Which is the problem? That is, if you do something like this, it's not possible to compute when the number of options became very high, okay? 10 options means more than 10 million possible rankings. Obviously, by hand is impossible, but I know some of you are computer scientists. What will happen with the computers? This is a problem even with very powerful computers. It's called an NP-hard issue. Means it's not computable, okay? Computers will get absolutely, let's say, out of possible computation. This was one of the issues, okay? It was agreed, oh, this is very way of dealing with the issue, but how we compute it. So it's not only an issue of having computers, having a good numerical algorithm to approximate the solution in the quickest possible way. This is basically, so till now, this is not my work, okay? This is a summary of what the median ranking literature will say. What we have contributed with some of my colleagues is how we compute it, okay? So we have developed a numerical algorithm that's quite sophisticated. I must say, with some prominent moment is the benchmark in this type of literature that allows us to compute whatever number of options we have. In theory, in the Socrates software, you don't have any limit of the options, but applying this idea of the median ranking, okay? So that's very important. Just to have an idea, as I said, you will not get easily a result even with 10 alternatives, but if you go through this numerical algorithm, you can get even 500, this case what we measured here, but even for 500 options in a few seconds, okay? Few seconds. This make, so convergence is very quick. Approximation is the other criterion by which you can measure this type of algorithms, is also quite tight. Means that if you do all the possible combination and you get the precise result, and if you use our numerical algorithm, the possible mistake is very low. So that's exactly why it's at the moment the benchmark algorithm. Okay, it's very quick and also very precise. As you can imagine, this becomes more and more important if you want to do sensitivity analysis. Okay, because if you want to do sensitivity analysis, means that this all quite difficult computations have to be done many times, okay? A lot of times. So the computer time would be really something impossible. So that's exactly why we can do sensitivity analysis in this framework. That's also another peculiarity of Socrates. We are implementing this type of median ranking algorithm thanks to the algorithm we have developed. And we can do for the first time, because it was impossible in the past to do this for the median ranking algorithm, a sensitivity analysis. How we do this? We can simulate, this is the way the global sensitivity analysis is working, we can simulate all the possible combination of weights. I will show you in a moment, this is very important, okay? Weights are a key issue. So, what happens if we could consider all the possible combination of weights, but how we consider this possible combination? We have to simulate. So, what we do is a simulation of all the possible combination through a sample, because otherwise it's infinite. So what we use is something so-called quasi-random numbers. They are much more precise than random numbers. So this is random number that whatever computer can generate nowadays, but you can see the difference with quasi-random numbers, okay? Quasi-random create a much better sample. If you see this in 2 dimension and 3 dimension, the representation of the possible space is much better. This is not something that we have done. The quasi-random numbers have been developed by a famous Russian mathematician, Sobol. I met him. He was still alive 5 years ago. I'm not sure if he's still alive or not. He was blind, but very, very clever person. So you can see you have always to build on shoulders of giants. So we have used various pieces of literature that we developed over time. The median ranking, everybody agrees this is good. How we implement, we have to develop a numerical algorithm. How then we perform the sensitivity analysis? If we use so-called quasi-random numbers, we can simulate all the possible combination of weights. Now we have all the ingredients to have the software, and to play with it. There is the last piece of information I would like to give you is this.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Based on your slide in the error vector, so the error graph.
Yes, this one. I would like to make sure about the level of confidence in this sample. Is it through using a level of confidence around 82% until 10%, or
It's not a rate, or it's not.
no, not
It's
range.
not an interval of confidence. This is the result of this equation, because we ran till the point that we could use a precise algorithm. So we knew exactly what the precise algorithm result was. Then we ran the heuristic algorithm, the numerical algorithm that is approximating the exact one, and then we see which is the difference between the precise result and the approximation. And as you can see, it's very, very low. This is the percentage that you might run the risk of having not precise result.
Yes, in my opinion, I also already study about statistical analysis using level of confidence, and we usually use a 90% level of confidence and error factor 5%. So it's mean this error factor like this or not? Thank you.
But again, it's not an interval.
Oh,
It's not
difference, right?
interval.
Oh, difference. Okay, thank you.
because this is the way you evaluate the approximation of your numerical algorithm. Okay? So you exactly know, and you are simply evaluating how distant is the truth for what you are approximating, and then you know exactly, okay, which your mistake is. So it's not a probability. This is an exact number. What I want to say, and then go. There is still something missing here. Which is the piece of information we have still to use? I said what we have. Number-weight relationship we are using on this, but we are not using density of preference, okay? Here we have that the GDP of this country is almost the double of this, but we are simply saying A, B is better than A, okay? So in theory we are losing a piece of information. That's sometimes the issue with non-compensatory approach. How we can in reality use this information? By something called threshold, okay? We can still use intensity of preference without being compensatory, okay? That's the reason why then things became complex, but I just want to give you this piece of information. And this is what in Socrates can be done. That you decide which is a threshold that is relevant for you in that criterion. That might be very relevant in radiological protection, I imagine, okay, with radiation, etc. So, the idea is, which is the difference that really has that is really important in your problem. If you have to buy a car, the fact that one car is €1 less expensive than the other one is really creating something, a difference? No. Maybe €1,000, yes, okay? So not all differences are important. So if you introduce this idea, you get more or less complex thresholds, meaning which is the intensity of preference that is relevant on that criterion for you, or for the problem we are handling, okay? This is a way of considering intensity of preference in your problem without compensating. So that's the overall issue. How to use all the information we have, but still being in this non-compensatory world. I will show you. Okay. So, how everything goes in the Socrates software. First of all, how you land in Socrates. If you Google Socrates alone, you will get all the information on the real important Socrates, meaning the philosopher, okay? He has 3,000 years of history more than the software, so no game. So please, when you want to get to the Socrates software, combine the word Socrates and the social multi-criteria evaluation, and immediately Google will bring you here, okay? This is a web page of JRC. In this web page, you get some basic information of what social multi-criteria and Socrates is. You get also some materials like the manual of the software, and you get all the scientific literature behind it, okay? That's very important. Everything has been published on the different aspects of it. And you have also, for example, here at the moment, you have an example of application in the impact assessment I was telling you, okay? You have the software. By the way, I uploaded in the Teams webpage also these papers, the manual of the Socrates, all the technical papers behind it. So For the ones of you that are more interested in, let's say, in all the technicalities, the mathematics, etc., you have the paper there if you want to look at them. So, then how you can continue? From this landing page, you click on Access to Socrates, and you are here, okay? So very easy, as I said, everybody can use it. Very important. Once you have clicked on this link, you don't have any interaction with the Commission server anymore, okay? So as I said, all the data, whatever you use, stay in your browser and in your computer. So, let's start. So, what the computer will ask you? As I told you, this is a way of having a support for your problems, not solving your problem. So, which is the first question you have to answer in a decision problem? Which your options are? Okay. So the software will say, okay, which are your options? In principle, as I said you, thanks to these numerical algorithms, you can have whatever number of options you would like to have in your problem. Normally, in this type of issues, you don't have hundreds of options. But anyway, you may use whatever number of options you would like to have. So I just, for simplicity, for example, I start with something easy, okay? The mobile phones example. So, what you get is which are your alternative. In this case, your option are the various mobile you are considering to buy. Then, second question, which is your decision model? So, which are the dimensions you want to consider? In this case, for example, economic dimension, technical structure, use of it, subjective evaluation. Then, which are the objectives you want to achieve in each of these dimensions? For example, from the economic point of view, I want to minimize the cost of it, but I also want to minimize the risk of buying something that is too cheap and that doesn't work. I want to maximize the performance. I want to maximize the storage. I want to maximize the battery performance. Which are the criteria that measure if my options are consistent or not with these objectives? Obviously, price, brand reliability for the risk minimization, for the performance RAM, ROM, battery charging power, battery life, weight of the overall mobile, etc. Okay, so you have the classical structure we were telling you. Which are the relevant dimensions? Which are the relevant objectives? How we measure if we are consistent with these objectives? Here you have an important piece of information. This wheel is giving you a piece of information that is very relevant in practice. In social issues, the weighting issues immediately will arrive, okay? And when the social issue, then the weighting issue is there, often in practice, many people will say, okay, since we do not agree which is the basic weighting, let's put the same weights to all criteria. Immediately the software is telling you, okay, good idea having all the criteria with the same weights, but, so you see immediately importance, weights as importance coefficient. Without knowing the scores yet, we can already know which is the importance of what? Of the criteria we are considering, but this means that the dimensions we are considering will weight completely different way, okay? For example, we have that this dimension is going to weight 46% of the whole thing, okay? Just because this dimension has more criteria. It's like a party in the parliament. The more representative of that party are in the parliament, the more powerful is that party. But maybe this is not what we want. Take care that in the practice, this is another common mistake. People say, okay, we have not to fight. Let's put the same weight to our criteria. Do not understand that as a meaning this. If you look at all the hierarchy, this means that you are weighting in an implicit way the dimension. So the other possible starting point is dimension. You decide the all dimension weight the same, and then you know the all criteria will weight in a different way. Okay? These are two possible starting points. Or, in some cases, the starting point may be that you want to have some of this dimension weighting in a different way, okay? So what you can do is changing the weight of this dimension, okay? The software also allows you to do that. Personally, what I would suggest to you is a starting point that, okay, this is an example, is personal decision, so you can do whatever you like, but in principle, a good starting point is equal dimension weights, okay? Because if you want really to integrate environmental, economic, etc., dimension, a good starting point is having the same weight. What you can do then? Impact matrix, you already know. So, what means impact matrix? That you... I don't want this credit, sorry. Something wrong. So for each of these criterion, I have to measure it on different possibilities. For example, the price. Okay, the price of a mobile is not exactly the same if you buy on Amazon, in a shop, in a different shop. So a possibility is to model it through so-called fuzzy number. This is very typical in many real-world case study that you don't know exactly, you know that is a quantity, but you know exactly how much precise that quantity is. You have uncertainty, as it was told before, okay? So we can model this uncertainty through this idea of fuzzy number, meaning an interval. Then this interval can be symmetric, can be more on the left, more on the right. You might have many different possibilities to do that, okay? You might have a qualitative criterion. So, for example, brand reliability would be very good, very bad, etc., okay? Or you might have a more precise number. Like in this case, ROM, this can be measured in precise gigabytes. So you have a precise number. So these are the basic characteristics of multi-criteria decision analysis. We may have different dimension, different objective, different criteria. We may have different weights. In this case, always with the meaning of importance coefficient. You immediately saw why this is important. We may have an impact matrix, what I called yesterday, the evidence-based in social and policy problem. I mean, what science and technology say about your problem, and this course can bring completely different measurement units. Gigabytes, money, qualitative, okay, good, bad, etc., with some uncertainty, fuzzy numbers. So we may have all this type of information. From this point of view, is very allows you a lot of flexibility. Whatever information you have, it may go there. Now what we have to do? You remember, now the algorithm what will do? The pairwise comparison of all these possible options according to all the possible criteria, that in this case are quite a lot, okay? So you see immediately no software, no game, okay? So, what now the software will do? Now I go to a more typical example in policy, so we can use all the possible information. So, let's imagine that this a siting problem of a power generation plant, okay? Can be a photovoltaic plant, an aeolic park, a nuclear power plant, okay, whatever we may consider. So we have to site this infrastructure somewhere. What you will have? You will have different options, okay? Different possible sites. How we evaluate them? So, this what would imply that according to your discussion with the social actors, with the scientists, with the policy makers, etc., you have decided that these are the possible options. How we evaluate them? Again, we need to have a discussion with all the social actors and the technical people about what? The dimensions we want to use, the objective we want to achieve, the criteria we want to use. So in this case, for example, we have economic dimension, technical dimension, environmental dimension, social dimension. Okay? Very typical in this type of problems. Once we have decided, this has to be consensuated between all the different actors, okay? The social actors, the stakeholders, the technical people, the scientists, the policy makers, etc. Once we have decided this, which are the objectives? In the economic side, we have to consider the public and the private objectives, okay? Because they are too different. In case of what is better for a community, you have to incorporate, for example, the so-called social cost. What is better in terms of private, of the people who live there? This discussion was already done for environmental remediation. From the private point of view, what happens in change of real estate value? The house you owned might completely change the value, okay? So this is an important criterion, but will affect more private business of some people. But from the public point of view, we may consider, okay, which is the investment cost? How much money the society has to put in this? Which is the number of jobs that will be created? From the technical point of view, well, maybe we may consider again what the community would like to achieve, what the company would like to achieve. Because, for example, what the company wants is technical feasibility, something we can do. Maybe if we can do in the easiest possible way. But from the community point of view, for example, what will be important is the visual impact of what you are going to build with this new infrastructure. The noise, the smell, we saw various examples, the consistency with the cultural heritage and so on. From the environmental point of view, again, we might have a different objective, the local point of view and the global point of view. Or in some cases, the short term and the long term. You might have conflicts. You remember, multi-criteria analysis is about conflicts. You might have conflicts even inside the same dimension, okay? For example, for the local impact, from the local point of view, impact on land, impact on biodiversity, okay? From the global, what is happening to CO2 emission, okay? If you go for eolic or for photovoltaic or even for nuclear, you avoid some CO2 emissions. So this is something important, but not only for the local, but for the global point of view. So we have to consider all these issues. Social, the well-being of your population, no? For example, avoidance of social exclusion of some of these social actors. What is about the recreational activities? If the land was used for recreation, it cannot be used anymore. Residential attractiveness that then becomes an issue sometimes, the community identity. That's very important. Sometimes with this big infrastructure, it may completely change. On the other way around, if you do some environmental remediation, this may improve a lot. So you have to consider many things. Again, how you get here? You get here through all this process, okay? Once this has been concentrated, meaning the option you are considering, the dimension, objective criteria you are considering, you have to decide which is your starting point. For example, equal weights of criteria, equal weighting of dimension. You might also go for the equal criterion weights, but then immediately you see that this would imply that a couple of dimensions would have a higher weight. So probably it's not a good idea, but we can explore this. So what the software is going to do is going to tell you what will happen according to different assumptions. So let's start with the equal dimension. Then we have the impact matrix. As I already said, here you might have everything, okay? You might have qualitative information, quantitative, you might have fuzzy numbers, whatever, okay? That's the main characteristics. Here, of course, is what I told you is the evidence-based. So, what science and technology say you about your problem. Each one of these criterion, if it came from some social actors' concerns, is to be a technical criterion that can be measured or can be evaluated according to experts' opinion. Okay? Here we do not have subjective evaluation of stakeholders. We have evidence as much as possible. So, what you expect now to have? The pairwise comparison, okay? Meaning, for each one of the criterion we are considering all the possible pairs of alternatives and how this criterion, number of jobs, say, is in favor of one or is in favor of two. So, per row, you know which is the criterion you are considering and how it evaluates all the different possible pair of options. Obviously, if you have only one pair of options, as we are talking about on dinner, no? This is already your evaluation. You know exactly for each pair how it performs by column according to all the criteria you are considering. So per row you know what is happening according to this criterion all the way. In this case 1 is better than 2, 1 is better than 3, but 4 is better than 1. Okay, this is what is saying. And in this case the bar is how much is better. Okay, according to the issue I told you about, threshold, etc. By column is according to all the criteria what happens between alternative 1 and alternative 2. So you know everything about the tennis matches we had, okay? Which is then the next point. You already know that ranking matrix, okay? This is the aggregation of all the possible criteria according to all the possible comparison, pairwise comparison. As you already know, it's a constant sum, okay? The sum of weights, they are in favor of 1, and the sum of weights, they are in favor of B. If you make the overall sum, is to adding up to 1. 100%. Now what we do? We apply the numerical algorithm that simulate all the possible ranking we may have, and we know which is the winner, meaning this is the ranking that gets the maximum support, okay? If you do all the possible permutations of all the possible ranking by using the outranking matrix, you remember, you sum up all the support to the overall rankings, you have to simulate them all. You know that here the winner, the cap, is at option 6. Then you know the alternative 3 is the second best, and so on and so forth, okay? You have a precise ranking, but then you may immediately ask from where this information is coming from. From the criteria I'm using, okay, we agree that these are okay. The information I put in the evidence impact matrix, in multi-criteria impact matrix. Okay, we agree that this is the best we can get at the state of the knowledge. Still, there is something that was less subjective and more subjective. So what happens if my starting point would be a different criterion weights? Well, let's see. So, is the ranking changing or not? Well, at least the winner is not changing, okay? So, you're already starting to have some important information on the uncertainty connected to the ranking. You know that at least the two basic starting points, equal criterion weights, equal dimension weights, are not changing the winner. So your results are quite robust, but I can explore this more. And this is what is the local sensitivity analysis about. In reality, local sensitivity analysis is giving you a lot of information on the robustness, but also understanding better your decision model. Here is what happens if I delete the economic dimension, okay? This in sensitivity analysis literature, this still means without the dimension, okay? This is what it happens if I use only the economic dimension. You see that here, without the economic dimension, the results are not changing. But if you use only the economic dimension, results are changing. And it's happening something interesting that more than one ranking get the best, okay? This may happen. It's a bit the cases that is said, not always the majority is that clear. So in this case, you get that more than one ranking is acceptable. So basically, you're saying, okay, the economic, if I cut it from the analysis, the reality is not changing much. But if I'm using only economic, so if I would be in a standard cost-benefit analysis framework, my result will change, because then it's not 6 anymore. You see, the two best options are alternative 1 and alternative 3. I can continue this with all the other, okay, the technical, the environmental, and so on and so forth. So I understand better the factors that are influencing my model, okay, the factor I put inside my model. I'm understanding the role they play in my model. This is called local sensitivity analysis. Why? Because you are changing one parameter per time, okay? Here I'm looking at what happens if I cut the dimension, or I use only the dimension. Here I'm use it to something different. That is, what happens if I delete one criterion per time? And then I realize that basically it doesn't happen anything. That's an important piece of information, because it means that no one criterion per se, no only one, is really that important that is a change in the result, okay? So it means that all criteria you are using converge, play a role, but they are not key criteria, not changing everything just because you delete that criterion from your analysis. Another piece of important information. Visualization of the result. One thing that you have to know, and I would be very happy to have feedback, because we are continuously trying to improve the software, okay? As I told you, there is a lot of mathematics behind, but you don't see it, okay? The idea was to have as much user-friendly interfaces we could imagine. I think all the feedback till now has confirmed that, but if you have whatever feedback, whatever comment, if you use it, please, we will be very happy to have your opinion. Here is the summary of all the local sensitivity analysis results. What happened when I cutted one dimension, when I use only one dimension, when I cutted only one criterion, when I used only the one criterion. So, per row, you know, alternative one, how many times was first, second, third, and so on, okay? It's a frequency. Per column, according to the first place of the ranking, which was the option that was more present, alternative 65% of time, okay? So, this is the information you have in the table. Then you may represent this information per row and per column with these graphics. So we really try to make the clearest as possible. So here you know, okay, alternative 6 is, you see immediately, is the one more present in the first place. Alternative 3, the one more present in the second place. Here is alternative 1, how many times is in the first place? Very few times. Alternative 6, a lot of time, okay? So, you have the information, you have the matrix per row and per column, also in terms of graphics. This type of graphics are continuously presented, okay? So, they try to synthesize all the information you have. What was the other things we may change? The weight to the dimension, okay? The starting point was, okay, all dimensions were the same. But then I may ask, what happened local sensitivity? So, one dimension per time. What happens if I start with almost 0.01 weight to the dimension, and then I start increasing this weight? Ceteris paribus, meaning all the other dimensions will have the same weight. The more you put the weight on that, let's say, the economic dimension, for example, the less of the other will weight. Till 50% maximum. Why? Why maximum is 50%? Any clue? Because if I go more than 50% means that the dimension will start getting the majority. And this is not what I want, okay? I already studied before what happens if I use only the dimension. Here I want to know the role that the weight play to that dimension only till 50% maximum. So it cannot decide everything by itself. And again, you get something like this, okay? What is happening to your problem? And here you can see that still alternative 6 is a very robust one, okay? According to the weight you may change to the dimension. Your basic best option are alternative 6 and alternative 3, okay? In this case. So you are starting having very clear information on the role that weights play in your problem and the uncertainty of these rankings. So, which is the role of the weights, how robust that weight is. What you can do still, something very important, criterion weights. What happens if, you can see how quick it is. This is what I told you. Imagine how many computation is doing. Here is changing the weight of each criterion from 0.01 to 50%, one step, is computing all the corresponding rankings each time, and then summarizing. And here you get that, okay, again, the problem seems quite robust. Okay, alternative 6, the majority of times, exactly the almost 68% of times is the winner. Okay, it's very robust. This does mean that some specific set of weights are also in favor of alternative 4, for example. Okay, so the information is about what is robust. Whatever you change, the majority of times alternative 6 is the best, but take care. If you use specific set of weights, you can also get 4 or 3 even. So you get information about all the uncertainty you have in your problem. Again, this is the local, the weight of one criterion per time. It's like partial derivatives. If you are in the continuous world, you have a function with many variables. We are computing the partial derivatives. But I can do something more, that is the global sensitivity, meaning, okay, but now I want to simulate all the possible set of weights, what I showed you, the so-called quasi-random numbers. If I simulate all these possible interaction, even very strange case, 0 weight to one criterion, 100% to another one, etc. What is going to happen? And this is the so-called global sensitivity analysis. Now you know that whatever you do, still option 6 is very robust winner, but obviously there might be some specific weights that would be in favor of others. Okay? So you get all this possible information. So basically now, if we perform all this, what we know? That option 6 is quite robust option. From the technical point of view, is very defendable. But now I would expect the question, what the social actors would like to have? Okay, so this is a typical multi-criteria decision analysis, more or less technocratic. Even if we have done all the social actors in interaction, etc., etc. In the social multi-criteria evaluation, we have something more. That is the equity analysis, meaning, okay, who are the social actors I would like to consider? There are some of them. All the ones I was interacting to start understanding which one might be the options, which might be the criteria, and so on and so forth. I know them all. Then, do they have the same weights or not? The software by default is using the same weight. But let's imagine that in this case the policymaker says some of these are more important than others, for whatever reason, okay? He or she can justify that. Okay, I start with this. Then I have the social impact matrix. That is the voting matrix as it should be, meaning according to all the different groups I'm considering, which is their evaluation of all the options, okay, not just what is my preferred option, I explain you why, but all the possible options, okay? How I get this? With all the techniques that Catrinel already showed to you, okay? We are discussed. You have many ways, social participatory methods, tools, and approaches you can use to get this piece of information. Interviews, focus group, questionnaires, you can combine everything. But this is what you will get, okay? All this qualitative, you might have three possibilities. This linguistic, the plus or minus issue. See the problem to see the mouse, okay? The ordinal, like the information that Paul was asking you, who is first, second, third. Linguistic, very good, very bad, etc. You might have also a numeric assessment with numbers. This is more for different type of application. For example, you want to have some positive discrimination for low-income groups. So you can measure distribution of income, then you get numbers, okay? This is a bit less participatory than most type of political economy approaches. But the software allows you these three type of possibilities. Which is the output, why it might be interesting? You get two outputs. One is a dendrogram. It's a complex word for technical word, but simply say, which is the possibility that the different social actors have a convergence of interests. Okay? So how this is obtained? It is a computation based on the distance that the different social actors have in their assessment of the different options. And these values here is the credibility of this convergence, okay? The credibility of this convergence. Then, what you know, in the table you have each of these possibility of convergence. Here you see it's even one. So very credible. And what will happen, which is the ranking they would like to have. Okay, so the algorithm, the ranking algorithm is applied coalition by coalition. Okay, so you see, for example, that this first coalition would like to have 4, and now this other coalition 6, this other again 4, this other 2, and you arrive at the final one, that is, if I consider all the social actors, so it's a voting, okay, and they would vote for this, which is the outcome. So we apply the voting algorithm to all their preferences. We get that this is, we are in a lucky case, okay? Option 6, that was the most defensible from a technical point of view, is also what the overall community might prefer, okay? So, in this case, we have the best technical solution, also the best from the opinion-based, okay? Remember, evidence-based, science, opinion-based, what people think about, what they would like to have. The two things may coincide, the two things might slightly differ. Maybe 6 will be not the winner, but the second best in the evidence-based is what majority would like to have. This is also good. Or you might have completely different results. As a policymaker, it's up to you to decide if you give more weight to opinions or to evidence, but you have this piece of information. What else you can do? Obviously, I told you, okay, but all also may depend on the weights I gave. In this case, the policymaker had some specific preference. Okay, what happens if I put the same weight to all actors? that this would have been the starting point of the software. Okay, obviously the impact matrix is not changing, but I will go here now for the dendrogram and the result. Okay, let's see if we have any surprise. Yes, we have. Okay, here we have an issue because if I change the weight to my social actors, I consider they all with the same weights, I would have expected results are changing, okay? Now, what the majority of people would like, having the same importance, is option 4. And option 6 is becoming much lower in the ranking, okay? So, at this point, I may ask again, how robust are these results? So I can do again the local sensitivity analysis of the weights I can put to the social actors. So I discovered that there is an issue. Okay, if I change weight to social actors, they might have something more desirable or not. So in this case, I only perform local, meaning no one of these social actors may have more than 50%, because otherwise would be very strange. What I get? Well, I have interesting result now, okay? In my problem, in the opinion-based matrix, the most robust alternative, whatever I do, changing the weights, I get that option 4 is the one that the majority of cases is the winner, okay? 78, 79 almost, percent of cases is the winner. Alternative 6, it is sometimes, but only 7%. So, the result that was a nice combination, having the most desirable from the evidence point of view and the most desirable from the opinion point of view, is basically grounded on the weights I attach to the social actors. As I told you, what the software is giving you, is giving you a precise answer? No, it's exploring your problem. It's telling you which is the consequence of all the assumption you might put in your model. It's up to the policymaker to decide and to defend that probably the policymaker will say, okay, but then I want option 6 because this is what science says. Then you have to be ready to discuss with your social actors saying, okay, I understand that this is what you would like, but as a policymaker, I think that science has to be believed, and what science is saying that 6 is a very good option because it's a reasonable option, balanced. You have to consider that people, the opinion-based matrix is a bit like how if we use only one dimension, because some of these social actors would be much economic oriented, some more environmental oriented, and so on and so forth. So it's clear that often what people want and what the result of the multi-criteria analysis will be may differ. May differ a lot of it, or not, or very few, but they may differ with a certain probability, let's say high probability. Then the point is what the policymaker wishes to do, okay? But we can do this in a very transparent way. This is the basic issue. It was asked, what about uncertainty? We can deal with most of the uncertainty we may have in a problem. The objective one, the technical one, probabilities, etc., etc. The more subjective one, that basically is about weights. As I told you yesterday, take care, a precise set of weights is never acceptable per se, because if you don't know what happens if you change that way, the set of weights, your results are not that credible, because there might be a lot of uncertainty. In this way, you explore uncertainty. Obviously, at some stage, you have to take a decision. And not often is an easy decision, but that's exactly why policymakers exist. And that the premise that Kadrinel and I started with is we want to help people. Helping. We want to help people. We want to support policymakers. We do not want substitute policymaker. Okay? No scientist and no piece of software can substitute the policymaker. We help with scientific evidence, with technical evidence, with the possibility of exploring this information with a piece of software, but the overall idea of social multi-criteria evaluation, of multi-criteria decision aid as theorized is helping, supporting, aiding something taking a decision, not substituting. It's not just a computation. That's very important. I think I stop here. Whatever that question you have, I invite you to play with the software. As I told you, it's completely open. You get there, you do whatever you like. You have the manual, it's very easy to read. It's not very long. There is an example you can build yourself just to see, to play a bit with the software. It's very, very user-friendly. It's very easy to use. If you want to play, you are very welcome. If you have any feedback, also very welcome to receive it. Question, doubts? You are very tired? I imagine, hungry? Yes, please.
Thank you. I have a question. In order to increase the more accurate result, we can use Sobol value, right? And why the software only just recommended less than 1,500? Thank you. Sobol value, Sobol.
Sorry, I don't know.
I read the manual. There is a Sobol value explanation, right? Sobol value, yes.
Okay.
Why? Yeah.
So,
thank you.
Global sensitivity analysis, okay? So, which is the number of Sobol numbers you may use. In literature, it's said 1,500. Normally, they are a very good sample. Okay, that's the reason why the software starts with this. You can, the software allows you, if you click on an advanced option, you may change this. So you can put whatever number of quasi-random numbers you would like to have. So you can improve this, you can increase this. All the simulation we did confirmed the literature, so saying that if you go even for 100,000 Sobol quasi-random numbers, the precision of the result stays the same. So, just for saving time, because of course, you know, the number of computation, and if you have okay, you might have a problem with 100 options, okay? Then if you start having 100 options and 100,000 simulations, you mean that, okay, it will not take days, but it will take hours. But will not improve precision very much. So, by default, the software is using 1,500. You can improve if, if you have a very, very specific problems where you think that the precision has to be really at whatever decimal, you can try. But really, normally, it doesn't change much, almost nothing. Yes?
Thank you. I have a question. We know that in every problem there is some alternative, but we also have time reference, right? Maybe now the alternative 1 or 2 is the best, but then later number 3 and 4 going better, and in the future maybe 5 and 6 is the most possible. So in the concept of circularity and sustainability, we come back to that we can we can change the solution by time, right? So how about this problem where we can add the time reference? Thank you.
I see Catherine very willing to answer this question. I saw you.
No, just to say that we encountered this issue in a practical case study. This is a smaller room. So yes, indeed, we encountered this option in a real case study. That in this case, one option was better in the short term, another one was better in the long term because environmental impact would change depending on what we do. This is an ethical issue, I think. It has to be discussed by the decision maker with stakeholders, etc. So I think that I don't know. It's not something that the algorithm can solve. You know, it depends on how much importance you attribute to this criteria. You might also consider having 2 types of evaluations, so not putting everything in a model, but taking them aside. For instance, do the short term, do the long term, and then consider. I don't know, Giuseppe.
Yeah, I just want to, I would say exactly the same thing. You remember when I showed this? You might see the public side, the private side, the local side, the global side, the short-term side, the long-term side. You can already put all this information in your starting model. And then obviously what you get finally is still the, let's say, what is a balanced solution between all these conflicts. When you go for the local sensitivity analysis, you know exactly what happens if you only take the local or the global, the short term or the long term. The other possibility is another one. Depends on what you meant. If you mean at time 0 what I know, this is the only way I can model that. If the question is what happens if a long time I get more information about my problem, then obviously the only thing you can do is rerun the whole model. So you might have that at different stage, if you rerun the model, you get different result, but just because you changed your information. This is very reasonable. If, as the example of the car, I was going to buy the car, but then there is a new car on the market, okay, I will look at it, okay, may change the result. If I was going to buy a car, but I look at the TV and they said, okay, now it's compulsory to have a car with some green characteristics. So if you buy a new one, okay, say, oh no, then I wait. I have to know better which is this green characteristics a new car must have, and maybe you will buy a new car. So this depends very much if the learning process, if the conditions are changing, whatever, but then the only solution you have is to rerun the model because you are changing the impact matrix, the scores of the impact matrix. The other way, as Catherine said, is if in that moment you want to consider a different time frame, you can do, but then this you have to simulate in your problem. You can also do another thing. There are 2 different impact matrices, a short-term one and a long-term one, as if they arrive at the same result or not. So you can play a lot with this type of things. Remember what I told you yesterday. The multi-criteria modeling per se is very flexible, can be adapted to completely different type of problems, really completely different, okay? We are making examples that are completely different one another. So it's very flexible. It's up to you how to use this flexibility, obviously. Flexibility doesn't mean subjectivity too much, above all when it becomes arbitrariness. Remember that the whole idea is putting transparency in the decision process. So helping a policymaker, but enlightening a lot the consequences of the basic assumption. If I want to play, say, no, I want this, I will justify because I just choose this vector of weight that gives this solution. But then somebody say, hey, what happens if I change the weights? You have in troubles, okay? So we have to be sure we light as much as possible our problem. Transparency is really very important. Again, if we are in a framework that we think that kind of democracy is important, that social actor involvement is important, okay? These are the starting premises, of course. More questions? That's criticism, would be very happy. And thank you also for the very technical questions, by the way. So I saw that you read the papers and so thank you.
Just want to make some comments that there are many things involved, and this I talk about from experience. For example, we are talking about participation, but sometimes people will take positions with a very biased or very skewed information or suspicious, and you're talking about transparency. So it's a very big challenge for the technical people in charge of the work to somehow expose the reality of the facts. Let's say, for example, radon, which is a big issue. If you ask me, radon causes cancer, my honest answer would be yes, if certain conditions exist for the exposure to the gas. And that we know will depend on the concentration of radon and the time of exposure of the person to the gas. Then, if there is a continuation of the exposure over certain periods of time, of course, the probability to have lung cancer in the person will increase proportionality. Is there a possibility to have exposures to radon in open air? Particularly, let's say we have a tailings site and we are talking about a community that is located 20 kilometers away from the tailings. I would say the probability of having significant concentrations of radon in that community is practically zero, because there is a dilution, there is a decay, and no radon. The hypothesis will still be the same, radon and cancer, but the exposure situations simply will not be there. But I had the experience of dealing with situations in which the population was in discussions with scientific papers published in international journals, making this kind of correlation based on some evidence that was questionable. So this, for me, is a very difficult thing to deal with, because that will affect the opinions of the people. The other point is, and this is a basic aspect of remediation, when we say about we are not proposing return to background conditions. Some people may wish to have return to background conditions that technically could even be achieved, but then we need to understand the costs that are associated with this, right? Then there is also some ideas of a benign or eco-friendly solutions, like a filter remediation that has been exposed, and then or bioremediation using bacteria in groundwater, and experience shows that this type of solutions need to be seen with a very careful eyes because of a series of technical issues that they entail. Other thing that you need also to take into consideration the life cycle of the remediation solution. So you're not thinking about something that will work for 1 year, for 2 years, but we are talking about things that need to work for hundreds of years. And definitely some of the solutions you have will not be able to be totally functional over these long periods of time. Other point that I want to understand, that you need to understand is, if you have a private entity that is implementing remediation in its own activities, at some point of time, this private entity will be relinquished from the responsibility, from the liability, and will transfer this liability to the institutional control. Institutional control is essentially responsibility of the state. So the costs associated with the maintenance of this remediation will no longer be in the private entity, but will be in the state. And that means will be on the taxpayer for the eternity, for at least hundreds of years. So I think that when we have these conversations with different stakeholders, it's very important and take into consideration the transparency aspects and the ethical aspects. It's very important that all these elements, all these questions are clearly and demonstrated, because otherwise you may incur in some preferences that will frustrate those that were involved, because they will not materialize. And there are examples, and I'm not sure the opinions of Giuseppe and Katrina, we didn't talk about it. When you have frustrated expectations, it's very difficult, because you lose the trust, and anything else that you want to do later on will be more complicated. But as I was discussing with Tiago, I guess that as more people can understand the situation and more people can get in contact with the problem in hand, better it is. Trying to sometimes do what I see happening in some parts of everywhere, to hide information, to not present things the way they are. This is really the best solution for failure, because things sooner or later will be revealed. There will be always somebody working in the company, in the particular site, that will eventually be frustrated with the company and will reveal something that is not going on well, and then that will trigger some investigations, and then those problems will be apparent. Yeah. So I don't believe that hiding those pieces of information is at all useful. I am pro transparency, because even if the situation is not very nice today, it's better that it is understood and work together for the solution in the long term than simply hiding from the people in the expectation that things can be solved without that kind of interaction. So these points that I wanted to mention. From the technological point of view, there are things we can achieve. There are things that are more difficult to achieve, because the existing technologies, if can be implemented, whether they will be very expensive, whether they will not deliver what is expected to deliver, or they will not perform for the period of time they were supposed to perform. This is number one. Number two is about false information that lead people to have misunderstanding and make their form their opinion based on facts that are not really real, and this is also something that needs to be taken into consideration. And the third thing is about the transparency that is necessary to sustain this conversation. I guess that from what I have seen so far, these are really important things to consider and bring to this whole process, so that we can understand the limits, the boundaries of what can be achieved, and moreover, understanding the time frame in those things need to be achieved. There are some situations which are complex sites that you cannot achieve the desired end state in less than 100 years. So you have generations that will be involved in the process, because you cannot do miracles. Inshallah, we could, but it's not really possible, right? There are limitations, not only of budget, but the way things have to be done. So, for example, in Fukushima, the decommissioning of the reactor, the damaged reactor, Fukushima 1, is planned to take 60 years. 60 years is a lifetime, and this has to be understood, right? And what is important in those cases is to demonstrate continuous gains over time, show that the schedules are being met, with proper allocation of funds, so that everybody sees and can follow up what is going on. So these are some of the comments I would like to make, and say that in the agency we work in different fronts, right? There are documents that talk about technology. There are documents that talk about, let's say, planning, about costing. So all these aspects are dealt with, and this initiative here is trying to bring all these things together in the frame of a decision-making process, right? And I just forgot to say that, I would need to show that a bit of the structure of the IAEA, yeah? Because regarding this issue, we have three main departments that deal with subject. One is of Department of Nuclear Safety, that take care essentially of safety and regulatory issues. I don't deal with that. I understand all these issues. It's part of what I do, but this is not my responsibility. I'm in the Department of Nuclear Energy that focus on mainly implementation issues. And we have a minor contribution of the Department of Nuclear Science and Application, because in some occasions they can also have a minor contribution. So you need to understand that, because somebody here talked about REC-SUN, somebody participated in the REC-SUN, regulatory whatever of uranium mining and more. So this is not under my responsibility. It is a project developed by colleagues in nuclear safety. So you need to see, I know that for you, agency is something, a unique thing, but within the agency, there are different responsibilities. Okay, I just wanted to make this comment and add to the brilliant presentation of
Giuseppe. Thank you. May I just add one consideration, just to reinforce what Justor said. Transparency can be seen as a constraint by some policymakers, but sometimes it also helps policymakers. In which sense? Let's imagine what Or said. No, we may have something that is clearly showed by science, but the expectation of people are different. As in the example I showed you, if I ask opinion people, they would like to have something different from what the science and the technology based matrix is finally saying. But you have to consider that that opinion of people was expressed before knowing what the science-based, evidence-based information will say. So, if everything was did in a very transparent way, the policymaker can decide, okay, people would like to have something completely different, but it's very clear that science and all the even considering all the possible impacts, dimensions, etc., it's very clear that something is what we should do. Catrinella and I, we are working in a case study, real world, where we had this, okay? What the evidence is saying, what the people would expect is different. But then the policymaker, the real one, said, okay, no problem. We will try to explain to the people why it is different. So, which are the assumptions we have used? Which was the scientific assessment of the option, and why no way what they would like is something we can implement. And I think in this case our approach was helping them, okay, because it's so transparent. They say, okay, please look at it. For example, one action they proposed is, let's try to take the most educated of the various community and let's try to explain very well of the science, everything is behind, while this is what should be done, whatever they argue. So, I mean, it depends the way you use the tools. Transparency can be seen as a problem for a policymaker, but can be also something very helpful. The last thing I forgot to say, if you have your data, they stay on your browser, so don't be scared, nobody will look at them. But if you just do the save button, they stay on the cache of your browser, meaning that you might have a very bad surprise that you lose everything. So it's very important that now and then you go to this manage button and then you do backup project, meaning that you save all the project that you have on your computer, or you do this export, okay? That again is each single project. If you do backup all projects, you have are transferred from where you are in your computer. If you do export is project by project. Please don't forget to do this, because at some stage you get bad surprise because you clean the cache and you lose everything. Have a nice lunch.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Just to agree on that. First of all, we won't be coming after lunch directly to here, okay? You can leave your things here to lunch, so you don't need to carry everything with you, but you go back to the place that you were yesterday, right? And then, of course, about coffee break, it's up to you to decide, because you'll be focused on the exercise, right? So we go to the, but before we go back, because before we finish, we come back here, right? Let's say 4:30, so that we can round up, check if there is something pending, and I will have some additional information I want to give to you. Regarding the work, important thing is coordination, because an element of this type of thing is how you get organized to do the work. So have a good coordination and have a distribution of tasks, make the work flows better. But there is a need to have one coordinator for that may assign all these tasks. And the person will be eventually speaking on behalf of the group. And the group will be coming, not here, but will come to the stage to present the results, and everybody should understand what has been done. My experience with these exercises is that no one can cover everything, one can coordinate, but with responsibilities, and eventually, for more detail, the person who is in coordination can ask colleagues to complement the general information, not the kind of thing. Is anybody has anything to say in addition to what I said? That's not necessarily the best way, but everybody should understand everything, sum up, because we will be asking questions to the group. We will be pushing you on some issues to see, not if you are good or bad, that's not the idea, but what extent the concepts that we share with you were assimilated. We are particularly assessing our work, not your capabilities of assimilating the work, but how we were able to transfer the information. Okay, so back here at 4:30, and good luck with the and definitely I will be free here. We have some things to do, but if you have any doubt, don't hesitate to consult. If you have laptops, you can find a lot of information in the internet to address the issues. And yesterday somebody asked me, "Oh, is Teflon is a Teflon an issue?" No, forget about Teflon. There is no Teflon in the exercise. Teflon was the pollutant in which the study, the real case that this study case was based came from, but there is nothing about Teflon on this. Thanks for asking, because that was misleading. Forget about Teflon.